There were clumps of my hair in the sink. Not a few strands, not the usual trail we all shed here and there, but full defeated tufts. They gathered around the drain like little silent screams. I remember standing there, toothbrush hanging limp in my hand, staring at the remains of myself, and then I heard his voice behind me. Not worried, not gentle, just sharp. "You didn't clean the sink." That was all he said. I turned slightly, hoping maybe for a flicker of concern, a furrow of his brow, anything that might show he still saw me behind this unraveling body. But he was already walking away, muttering about how disgusting it was, how I should do something about it. I was losing parts of myself day by day, and all he saw was mess. Later that night, I caught him glancing at the drain again before brushing his teeth, his lips curling ever so slightly. He didn't say a word, but I saw it in his face. I wasn't attractive anymore, not just in the way a man might stop noticing, no, this was different. It was repulsion, and worse, impatience, as if I was an inconvenience now, as if my body's slow crumbling was an offense to his eyes, a betrayal of the woman he married. I remember how he used to brush the hair out of my face while I read. Once he even said he loved the way it fell across my eyes, made me look mysterious. That was long ago. Now when I opened the trash bin to throw the hair away, I saw his takeout containers stacked neatly, sushi, pad thai, garlic noodles meals I hadn't cooked, meals I hadn't even smelled coming through the door. That night I stood in front of the mirror, wrapped a scarf around my head, and tried to remember what it felt like to be looked at with love instead of recoil. I tied the knot tightly at the base of my neck, then loosened it again. Nothing felt right. Not the scarf, not the cardigan hanging off my bones, not even the room that used to feel like home. My skin, my smell, my silence, all of it felt foreign. When I came to bed, he was already asleep or pretending to be. He faced the wall. I stared at his back and whispered goodnight, but it disappeared into the air like smoke. No reply, no movement, just the hum of the ceiling fan spinning above us, slicing the night into pieces. I used to believe that love could survive anything. Sickness, aging, hardship, those were the vows, weren't they? But as I lay there in the dark, hands clasped over my belly, like I was already being buried, I began to wonder, what if some people only love the version of you that pleases them, the version that cooks, smiles, bends, gives, and when that version changes, when illness peels back the layers and leaves you fragile and exposed, they can't bear the sight. He kissed me the day I was diagnosed, one soft kiss on the forehead. I clung to it for weeks. I thought it meant something. But looking back now, I think that kiss was a farewell, a quiet, cowardly goodbye, disguised as love. The next morning I woke up and there were more strands on the pillow. I gathered them gently, held them in my hand like feathers. He walked past me without looking, his footsteps quick and light, as if the room held nothing but furniture. He didn't ask how I slept. He didn't see the way my fingers trembled. And still, I made the coffee. The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and stale magazines, that familiar coldness biting at my skin as I sat alone on the cracked vinyl chair. The chairs around me hummed softly with quiet coughs and the rustle of papers, but the one thing I noticed was his absence. He didn't come. I watched the door, hoping to see him walk in, the weight of his hand in mine, a smile to steady my trembling heart. But the door stayed shut and my chest tightened with each passing minute. I remember how once he said hospitals made him uneasy, the smell, the sick people. It all drags me down. He told me, his voice carefully measured. I thought he was just nervous, scared like me. But that day when he left me waiting alone, I felt something colder settle in my bones. Not fear, not sadness, but the quiet sinking realization that he was already pulling away. The nurse called my name softly, and I stood up, clutching the crumpled tissues in my pocket. He should have been there, sitting in the chair beside me, pretending to be brave. But instead, I was met with my own reflection in the glass door of the examination room, pale, fragile, but still standing. I tried to remember the last time he sat beside me like this, held my hand, when the doctor said the word cancer. The last time he brushed my hair back and whispered, "You're not alone." Sitting under the harsh white hospital lights, the doctor's words floated around me like distant thunder. I nodded, trying to absorb everything and nothing at once. I reached for my phone to tell him, hoping he would answer, that his voice might calm the storm inside me. But it went straight to voicemail. He was out somewhere else, somewhere far from this. The silence on the other end felt like a verdict, not just on my illness, but on us. That day, the scent of the hospital wasn't just antiseptic. It was abandonment. The sterile coldness reflected the emptiness between us. I realized then that he wasn't just sick of the place. He was sick of the woman sitting in that chair. At home, the empty side of the bed felt wider than ever. The room echoed with what wasn't said. I kept waiting for him to come back to hold me, as the chemo treatments made my body betray me to remind me I was still his wife. But the only thing that came through the door was silence. Friends told me I should be angry, that his absence was cruel and unforgivable. But in that stillness, I felt something else. A quiet understanding that sometimes love is not enough, that sometimes the people we think will stay forever quietly slip away when the world demands too much from them. That night I sat by the window, wrapped in an old sweater, watching the rain smear the streetlights. I let the tears fall without shame. For the first time, I accepted that his absence was not because I was weak or unworthy, but because he had never truly loved the woman I was becoming. And though the silence felt heavy, I began to hear the small, steady beat of my own heart. Tired, yes, but alive. It was the start of a journey I didn't ask for, but one I would walk alone if I had to. I remember that morning clearly, how I stood in front of the mirror wearing my old threadbare cardigan, the one that smelled faintly of lavender and years gone by. It was the only thing soft enough against my skin when the chemo burns made me raw. The fabric hung loosely, but I wrapped it tightly around me anyway, like a fragile shield. I caught his eyes as I passed through the room, hoping for some spark of recognition, a glance that said, "I see you still." But instead he looked at me as if I were a ghost, or worse, a burden. The way his gaze flicked away made my chest ache with a slow grinding pain, not the sharp agony of cancer, but the dull hurt of being unseen. He didn't say anything, just the faintest tightening of his lips, and a turn of his head like I was wearing the wrong outfit for a world he no longer wanted to share. Back then, I thought maybe it was exhaustion on his part, that the weight of my illness pressed on him too heavily. But over time, the fatigue didn't soften his eyes, it hardened them. Like my sickness had turned me into someone else entirely, someone he couldn't love anymore. I would sit quietly in the kitchen, nursing my cup of tea, and watch him move around the house like a stranger. His hands, once warm and steady, now trembled when he touched me, if he touched me at all. I wore my cardigan as armor, wrapping myself in its faded threads, trying to hold together the pieces of the woman he had once adored. There were moments, fleeting and fragile, when I caught myself wondering if I had failed some invisible test. Had I stopped being her? The woman who laughed too loudly, who danced in the rain, who wore bright lipstick just because she could. The woman he promised to love through sickness and health, in all her messy, imperfect beauty. But cancer stole those things from me one by one. My hair fell out, my skin paled, and my body grew thin and fragile. The mirror became a stranger's face, and the vibrant woman he married seemed like a distant memory. I tried to remember what I looked like in his eyes when we first met, radiant, hopeful, full of life. But now I felt invisible beneath the weight of his disappointment. One afternoon, I caught him staring at me from across the room, his eyes shadowed with something I couldn't name: pity, disgust, resentment. I swallowed the lump in my throat and lowered my gaze, wrapping the cardigan tighter. It was too much the way he looked at me, like I was a stranger who had no right to belong. And yet beneath that pain, a quiet strength began to stir. I realized that my worth wasn't measured by his approval or the softness of his gaze. I was still here, still fighting, still wrapped in this old cardigan that carried the scent of all the mornings I woke up determined to survive. That day I made a silent promise to myself I would not disappear into the shadows of his indifference. I would wear this cardigan like a badge of honor, a testament to the woman who refused to be forgotten even if he had already turned away. I remember the first night he stopped touching me. It was subtle at first, a brush of his hand that didn't linger, a kiss that barely brushed my cheek. Then the distance grew wider, like a slow leak in the fabric of our marriage. I could feel the space between us expanding, swallowing the warmth that once filled our bed. One evening I woke to find the sheets cold beside me, his side empty. I reached out, fingers searching for the familiar weight of his body, but found only silence. He had moved to the living room, he said, to give me rest, as if his absence could somehow soothe the burning ache in my bones. I lay there listening to the quiet rhythm of his breathing from the other room, a sound that had once been a lullaby, but now felt like a stranger's echo. I wondered if he thought I didn't hear the door click softly behind him, the way he closed himself away, like a secret too painful to share. That night I traced the outline of his empty pillow, the fabric cool beneath my fingertips. I thought of all the nights we had held each other close, whispered dreams and promises under the dim glow of the bedside lamp. Now there was only the steady tick of the clock, marking time in a room that had forgotten how to hold us both. Days passed, and the distance didn't shrink. His visits became shorter, his words fewer. He watched me with tired eyes, no longer the man who saw me as his partner, his equal, his love. The sickness had not only taken my body, but had stolen the tenderness between us. I became a patient to care for a shadow of the woman he once desired. I tried to reach out to bridge the silence with soft touches and whispered hopes, but he recoiled, as if my illness was contagious, not just to the body, but to the soul. He told me once that he needed space to heal himself, as if my pain was an infection he could catch. The words cut deeper than any chemotherapy burn. Sitting alone in the bedroom, I folded the sheets over and over in my lap, a silent ritual to keep myself grounded. I thought about the vows we took, the promises to stand by each other in sickness and in health, and wondered how quickly those words could unravel when faced with the raw truth of pain and fear. I realized then that love isn't always enough. Sometimes it's a fragile thing that slips away when the weight of suffering grows too heavy for one person to bear. And sometimes the people we thought would hold us through the storm find their own escape routes, leaving us to weather the tempest alone. That night, as I lay awake in the dark, I made a quiet decision. If he could not stay beside me in my most vulnerable moments, I would find the strength to stand without him. Not for him, not for anyone else, but for the woman in the mirror who still breathed, still fought, still hoped for a tomorrow worth living. The couch in the living room had become his new refuge, a place where he sought distance from the sickness that filled our home. I didn't blame him for needing space, but I mourned the loss of the man who once held my hand through every fear and every tear. And in that morning I found a flicker of something new, a quiet resolve to reclaim my own story, one breath at a time. Dinner became a ritual of loneliness, though I still prepared his favorite meals with trembling hands and a hopeful heart, even as the nausea racked my body and my appetite faded. I would stir the pot carefully, chop the vegetables finely, and set the table just as he liked it. Place mat at the edge, silverware gleaming under the kitchen light. I told myself it was for us, for the marriage that seemed to be slipping through my fingers like smoke. But most nights he came home late, or didn't come home at all. One evening the door clicked softly behind me, and I found a note. Instead of him, a scribbled message that said, "Already ate." I held that note for a long time, the paper crinkling beneath my fingers like a fragile ghost. The words stung more than any chemotherapy burn, cutting through my hope with cold precision. I remembered the times we'd shared meals, laughter spilling over the table, his hand reaching across to squeeze mine. Now the empty chair stared back at me, an accusing silence that echoed louder than any word. I ate alone that night, the warmth of the food a pale substitute for the warmth of his presence. The taste was bitter, not from the medicine coursing through my veins, but from the ache of absence. I realized that the meals I prepared were no longer bridges between us, but monuments to a love that was fading one bite at a time. The house grew quieter with every passing day. The clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, the shared stories all replaced by the tick of the clock and the sighs of a heart left waiting. I wrapped myself in the old cardigan again, its worn fabric a comfort against the cold void where companionship once lived. There were moments when I caught myself setting the table for two, imagining his return, hoping against hope that the note was a mistake. But deep down, I knew the truth. The man I loved was slipping away, not just physically, but emotionally, retreating into a world where I no longer belonged. I thought about the woman I had been full of life, laughter, and dreams, the woman who cooked with joy, who danced in the kitchen, who made their house a home. That woman was still inside me, hidden beneath the sickness and sorrow, waiting to be found again. One evening I sat at the table, the empty chair opposite me, catching the soft glow of the candlelight. I whispered to the shadows, to the memories, to the ghost of what once was. And as the tears traced slow paths down my cheeks, I made a silent promise to nourish myself with kindness, to reclaim the parts of me he had abandoned, and to find strength in the quiet spaces he left behind. That night the meal was for one, but it was enough. It was a beginning. I caught him once the way his eyes lingered on another woman. It was subtle at first, just a glance, a flicker of interest that felt like a sharp breath in my chest. She was younger, yes, her legs crossed neatly in the cafe where he stopped one afternoon. I saw the way his gaze traced the curve of her calf, the way his fingers tightened around his coffee cup, and there I was, clutching my wig in place, feeling the weight of every lost strand, like a silent accusation. It wasn't just the look. It was the way he shifted away from me afterward, as if the presence of illness and aging had made me invisible. I remembered the nights when his eyes held only me, when he traced my face with reverence and whispered promises that felt like warm blankets. Now those promises were frayed, unraveling in the cold light of his distracted attention. I tried to tell myself it was just a moment, a lapse, a weakness, something that didn't matter, but each time I caught him looking away, my heart shrank a little more. I wondered if he saw the woman I was, or only the shell my body had become. The cancer stole not just my health, but the eyes that once loved me without condition. There was a bitterness in that realization, a slow-burning ache that settled deep in my bones. I remembered the nights we spent talking about forever, about growing old together, about loving each other through every scar and shadow. And now here I was, forgotten, dismissed, replaced by a glance and a sigh. One afternoon I sat quietly in the living room, the soft hum of the television filling the space between us. He was across the room, eyes fixed on the screen, but somehow not really seeing. I wrapped my hands around my wig, the synthetic fibers rough beneath my fingers, and closed my eyes. The weight of his gaze on another woman felt like a cold wind stripping away the last threads of my dignity. But in that moment of pain, something shifted inside me. A small voice whispered that I was still here, still worthy, still whole beyond the cracks. I wasn't just the reflection of his desire or the illness that had made me vulnerable. I was a woman who had given everything, who had loved fiercely, who deserved to be seen not for what was lost, but for what remained. I began to understand that love was not always about possession or looks. Sometimes it was about presence. Sometimes it was about holding space for someone to be exactly who they were, even when the world changed. And if he couldn't do that, then maybe it was time for me to find my own way back to look at myself with the kindness he had forgotten to offer. The days grew colder, and so did his heart, but inside me a quiet fire burned. Not the fire of anger or revenge, but the steady flame of self-respect and survival. I wrapped myself tighter in the cardigan, breathing in the faint scent of lavender, and let the tears fall slow, cleansing, and free. He said it so casually, as if the words were nothing but air drifting between us. "You used to be sexy." Those 3 words landed in the room like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples through the fragile calm I had built around my heart. I stood frozen, the weight of his gaze pressing down on me, stripping away the layers of strength I had gathered since the diagnosis. I thought about all the mornings I had brushed my thinning hair, all the nights I had fought through exhaustion, to smile for him to be the woman he fell in love with. I remembered the scent of his cologne mingling with the warmth of our bed, the way his hands had once traced the curves of my body like a cherished map. But now his words erased all of that, as if my worth was measured only by how I looked to him. The cruelty of his statement wasn't just in what he said, but in what he left unsaid, the love that vanished, the promises broken, the nights spent alone, while he sought something I no longer could give. It was a reminder that illness had not only stolen my health, but also my place in his heart. I looked down at my hands, fingers trembling, and thought about the woman in the mirror, the one with pale skin stretched over fragile bones, hair gone, and eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. Was she really less worthy, less beautiful, less deserving of love? But beneath the ache, a quiet voice stirred. It whispered that beauty wasn't skin deep, that sexiness wasn't a fleeting glance or a passing touch, but something deeper, resilience, grace, the courage to face each day when the world seemed to turn its back. I thought of the flowers I had tended in our garden, their petals fragile yet persistent, blooming even in the harshest seasons. Maybe I was like them, worn and weathered, but still standing, still alive. That night I wrapped myself in the cardigan that smelled faintly of lavender and old memories, and I whispered to the darkness, "I am more than what you see. I am still here. I am still worthy." His words lingered in the air, but I chose not to let them define me. Instead, I let the silence fill the space between us, a silence that held my pain, my strength, and the slow, steady beat of a heart learning to love itself again. One morning, the suitcase was there by the door, neatly packed, its wheels resting silently on the worn floorboards, like a quiet announcement. I found it before he left a heavy weight in the otherwise empty hallway. There was no note, no explanation, just the cold certainty of absence waiting to happen. I touched the handle gently, as if the touch could stop time or change the course of a story already written. He said he couldn't watch me rot. The words were sharp and raw, cutting through the fog of my illness with merciless clarity. I heard them as if spoken from a distance, a cruel echo bouncing off the walls of a home that suddenly felt too large, too empty, too unfamiliar. The man who once promised to hold my hand through every pain was now choosing to walk away. I remember standing in the doorway watching him pack the silence between us, heavier than any argument. He moved quickly, as if speed could erase the years we had spent together, the nights spent in whispered prayers, the mornings filled with laughter and hope. All of it seemed to vanish under the weight of his decision. I wanted to ask him why. Why now? Why when I needed him most? But the words got stuck, caught between the sobs and the sharp sting of betrayal. Instead, I watched as he folded the last of his clothes, zipped the suitcase shut, and turned to leave, his eyes avoiding mine. In the days that followed, I wandered through the house like a ghost, tracing the paths we once walked side by side. The walls echoed with memories, his laughter, his touch, the quiet moments that had once filled the spaces between us. Now those echoes felt like shadows, reminders of a love that had slipped through my fingers like sand. Friends said I should be angry, that his departure was cruel and unforgivable, but my heart was too tired for rage. Instead, I felt a strange calm, a quiet acceptance that some stories don't end the way we hope, that sometimes people leave not because of who we are, but because of who they are or aren't. I wrapped myself in the cardigan again, its worn fabric a small comfort against the cold truth of abandonment. I whispered into the silence, I am still here, and in that declaration I found a fragile strength, a seed of hope growing in the cracks of my broken heart. The suitcase sat by the door for weeks, a silent witness to the chapters closing and the new ones waiting to be written, and though he left, I did not. I stayed holding on to the woman I was, and the woman I was becoming. Standing in front of the bathroom sink one morning, I noticed something different, the empty toothbrush slot beside mine. It was a small detail, easy to overlook, but that day it felt like the final punctuation on a sentence I wasn't ready to read. His toothbrush was gone, and with it the last piece of him that lingered in this house. I reached out to touch the cold porcelain, tracing the edge where it had rested for years, and the silence that answered felt deafening. The bathroom had once been a shared sanctuary, a place where we prepared for the day together, his cologne mixing with my lavender soap, our reflections side by side in the mirror. Now it was just me, the room echoing with absence. I ran my fingers under the faucet, the water cold and unforgiving, and I wondered when the space between us had grown so wide. I thought about all the mornings he had kissed me goodbye, the small gestures that made a house feel like a home, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle touch on my shoulder as he passed by. And now those memories seemed distant, like faded photographs tucked away in a drawer. There was a quiet grief in realizing that love could disappear in the spaces we didn't notice, in the empty toothbrush slot, in the unspoken words, in the growing distance between two hearts. I didn't cry that morning. Instead, I took a deep breath and leaned against the sink, feeling the coldness seep into my bones. In that stillness, I made a silent vow not to mourn what was lost, but to cherish what remained. My body, fragile and worn, still held the spark of life. My heart bruised, but beating still carried hope. And though he was gone from this small corner of the world, I was still here standing. I wrapped my hands around the soft fabric of my cardigan, the scent of lavender grounding me in the present. I whispered to the empty room, I am enough. The words felt like a lifeline pulling me from the edge of despair. That day, the bathroom mirror reflected a woman transformed not by illness or abandonment, but by resilience. The empty toothbrush slot was a reminder that some chapters end, but the story continues. I washed my face slowly, letting the water wash away the pain, and stepped back into the world, ready to face whatever came next alone, but not defeated. I walked into the chemo center alone, clutching the folder with my name neatly printed on the front. A stack of papers, appointments, test results, and treatment plans that had become the map of my new life. The sterile walls, the humming machines, the masked faces of nurses and patients. It all felt distant, like I was watching a movie about someone else. No familiar hand to hold, no comforting voice whispering promises of better days. Just me navigating the cold labyrinth of illness on my own. I remembered the first treatment, the way my hands shook as I signed the consent forms, hoping that this process would save me, even as it tore me apart. I had imagined him there beside me, his presence a steady anchor in the storm, but the chair next to me remained empty, the silence around it, a stark contrast to the steady drip of the IV. The nurses noticed. Their eyes softened when they looked at me, sympathy, pity, a hint of sadness. Friends called their voices warm but distant, offering support I desperately needed but struggled to accept. I was surrounded by care, yet profoundly alone. During those long hours, I stared at the ceiling tiles, tracing their cracks and imperfections, finding comfort in their unchanging patterns. I thought about the life I had lived, the laughter, the sacrifices, the love, and the life I was fighting to keep. The weight of absence pressed down on me, but beneath it a spark flickered, fragile, yet persistent. I thought about the woman I had been, the wife, the mother, the lover, and the woman I was becoming, a warrior, a survivor, a quiet force of will. The cancer tried to break me, but in those moments of solitude I discovered a strength I hadn't known I possessed. I learned to sit with the pain without flinching, to breathe through the fear, to find solace in the small victories, the days when I could eat, when the nausea lifted, when I caught a glimpse of hope in the mirror. I wasn't just a patient, I was a person reclaiming her story. Though the chair beside me remained empty, I filled that space with determination. I whispered to myself, I am not alone. And slowly the silence transformed from a void into a sanctuary, a place where I could gather the pieces of myself and prepare to face whatever came next. That folder in my hands was more than just papers. It was a testament to survival, to courage, and to the unyielding spirit that refused to be extinguished. And as I left the chemo center that day, I carried it with me like a shield, ready to face the battles ahead. I wrapped myself in the blanket I had knitted years ago, the one I made for our anniversary when life still felt like a promise. The yarn was soft, frayed in places where time had worn its touch, and it smelled faintly of cedar and forgotten afternoons. I pulled it around my shoulders like armor, its faded colors a comfort against the cold that settled deep inside me. I sat by the window, watching the rain blur the world outside, each drop tracing a slow path down the glass like tears I couldn't shed. The blanket held me close, a reminder of a time when love was tangible, woven into every stitch, with hope and tenderness. Now it felt like the last thread connecting me to a past that was slipping away. The house was silent, except for the ticking clock, its steady rhythm marking the passage of days, filled with loneliness and quiet despair. I thought about the years I had given raising children, keeping the home, loving a man who now looked at me as if I were a stranger. The sacrifices I made, the dreams I set aside, the nights I stayed awake, praying for strength. The blanket smelled like memories, and in its softness, I found a refuge from the harshness of the world. I let myself sink into the comfort it offered, wrapping the past and present together in its gentle folds. The tears came then slow and healing, washing away the bitterness that had taken root in my heart. I thought about the woman I had been before cancer stole her vitality, before love turned cold and hands stopped holding. And I thought about the woman I was becoming, one who could find solace in solitude, strength in vulnerability, and peace in the quiet moments. That blanket, once a symbol of celebration, had become a shield for survival. I held it close, letting its worn threads remind me that even when life unravels, there is beauty in the mending. As the rain softened outside, I whispered a prayer, not for his return, not for what was lost, but for the courage to keep going, wrapped in the warmth of my own resilience. People around me asked with wide eyes and soft voices, "How could he?" Their pity hung heavy in the air, a weight I wasn't sure I could carry, but I said nothing, not because I agreed with their judgment, but because I didn't want to be defined by their sorrow or their anger. I didn't want pity. I wanted silence, the quiet kind that holds space without judgment, that lets pain be pain without drowning it in noise. Their questions echoed in my mind, swirling like leaves caught in a gust of wind. How could he leave me when I was sick? How could he turn his back when I needed him most? I didn't have answers that could fill the emptiness his absence left behind. Instead, I found myself retreating into the quiet corners of my soul, seeking refuge in the stillness. I thought about the years we had spent together, the laughter and tears, the dreams built and shattered, and I realized that his leaving wasn't just about me. It was about the fragility of love, the weight of fear, and the limits of human endurance. It was a reflection of his own brokenness, not mine. In the solitude of my room, I let the silence wash over me like a gentle tide, carrying away the anger and the questions. I found peace not in answers, but in acceptance, a quiet surrender to the things I could not change. I wrapped my arms around myself, the old cardigan soft against my skin, and whispered, "I am still here." The words were simple, but they held the power of 1,000 storms weathered. They were a reminder that even in abandonment there is strength, even in silence there is voice. I chose not to dwell on the betrayal, but to hold on to the dignity that illness and heartbreak could not take. I chose to let go of bitterness and embrace the slow healing that comes from within. In that quiet place, I found a new kind of love, the love for myself, fierce and unwavering, the foundation upon which I would rebuild what was broken. And in that love, I was no longer alone. One morning, as the dawn crept softly through the curtains, I caught my reflection in the bedroom mirror, an image that surprised me with its quiet resilience. The woman staring back was not the vibrant figure I once was, nor the broken shadow I feared becoming, but someone who had weathered storms unseen by most. I touched my cheek gently, feeling the thinness of my skin, the faint lines carved by tears and time. And then, with a breath that tasted like both grief and hope, I said aloud, "This is still my body. This is still me." It was a declaration not to the world, but to myself, a reclaiming of identity beyond the illness, beyond the loss, beyond the judgment. I'd spent so long mourning what cancer had taken, what love had abandoned, that I nearly forgot the strength that still lived beneath the fragile surface. My body might be worn, my hair thin, my hands trembling, but I was still whole in the places that mattered. I thought of the garden I tended in the backyard, how the roses bloomed despite the harsh winds and shifting seasons, Like them, I had endured grown roots deep enough to hold me steady when everything else seemed to fall apart. The scars I carried were not marks of defeat, but badges of survival. Each morning since his leaving, I had learned to look at myself with kinder eyes, to see not the sickness, but the spirit that refused to be broken. I began to dress with care, not to attract anyone, but to honor the woman who still deserved respect and tenderness. The old cardigan became a symbol of this new beginning, worn, yes, but chosen with love. In quiet moments, I traced the path from despair to acceptance, recognizing the shifts within me, how pain had softened into wisdom, how loneliness had blossomed into self-compassion. I was no longer defined by what I had lost, but by the courage to stand in the light of who I was becoming. That morning I smiled at the reflection, a small, slow smile that carried the weight of 1,000 battles fought in silence. I whispered, "I am still here. I am enough." And for the first time in a long time, those words felt true. I unfolded the divorce papers with hands that trembled not from weakness, but from the gravity of what lay before me. The envelope was plain, unassuming, yet it held the final chapter of a story I had hoped would never end. I sat at the kitchen table, the soft morning light casting gentle shadows across the pages, and took a breath that felt like stepping into the unknown. There was no rage, no bitter words scribbled in the margins, just a quiet acceptance. I read the lines carefully, each sentence a step toward freedom, toward release from a bond that had frayed beyond repair. Signing my name was not an act of defeat, but a declaration of self-respect. It was the moment I chose to reclaim my life on my own terms. The weight of years spent caring, sacrificing, and loving without reciprocation pressed upon me, but beneath it all, a fragile peace blossomed. I was no longer the woman who waited in silence for love that had vanished. I was someone who had found the courage to say goodbye, to close one door so another could open. I thought about the future, uncertain, daunting, yet filled with possibility. The path ahead was mine to walk unshackled from expectations and disappointments. I could nurture the parts of myself that had been neglected, rediscover joy in small moments, and build a new story written in my own hand. The old cardigan hung by the door, a silent witness to the transformation unfolding within me. It had sheltered me through storms of sorrow, and now wrapped around me like a mantle of resilience. I stood up, folded the papers gently, and tucked them away, not as a symbol of loss, but as a testament to survival. That day I embraced the quiet liberation that comes from choosing oneself, the gentle power in walking away from what no longer serves the soul. I whispered to the stillness, "I am free." And in that freedom I found strength beyond words. Now I sit on the porch with a warm mug cradled between my hands, the early morning light spilling softly across the weathered wood beneath me. The old cardigan wraps me in its familiar embrace, a comforting presence in the quiet solitude. The house behind me is still and peaceful, a sanctuary reclaimed after the storms of loss and abandonment. I breathe in the crisp air, letting it fill the spaces where bitterness once took root. There is no bitterness here anymore, only a gentle strength that hums beneath the surface like a steady heartbeat. I think about the journey I have traveled, the fractures, and healing the moments of despair softened by the slow unfolding of self-love. The man who left me believed I was weak, but in his absence, I found a power that no illness or heartbreak could take away. The tea warms my hands, its steam curling like a whisper into the morning light. Each sip is a reminder that I am still here whole and worthy despite everything that tried to tell me otherwise. The garden blooms quietly beyond the porch petals, opening bravely to the sun just like me. I don't need anyone's validation now. I don't need to be loud or demanding. I just need this stillness, this peace, this quiet reclaiming of my own story. I gave them silence, and in it I found peace. They forgot me, but I never forgot myself. I didn't need to be loud. I just needed to leave. The cardigan slips gently from my shoulders as I stand the weight lighter than before. I step forward into the day, carrying with me the quiet rebellion of a woman who has survived, who has loved herself fiercely, and who has finally come home to her own heart. Now, in the soft folds of morning, I sit with the quiet echo of all that has passed. The cardigan drapes gently over my shoulders like a tender memory, worn familiar, yet full of new strength. The loneliness that once felt like a heavy chain has softened into a companionable silence, one that holds space for healing, for forgiveness, for gentle liberation. I breathe slowly, feeling the rhythm of life steady beneath the stillness. The pain has not vanished, but it no longer defines me. Instead, it shapes the contours of my resilience, the quiet dignity of survival. I am not broken. I am becoming. Each breath is a step toward peace, a soft rebellion against the shadows that tried to dim my light. In this moment, I am free not because of what was taken from me, but because I chose to reclaim what was always mine, my worth, my voice, my quiet power. The world may have forgotten me, but I have never forgotten myself, and in that remembering, I find a gentle, enduring strength that will carry me forward. This is the quiet victory of a woman who has loved lost and found herself again, not in loud declarations, but in the soft, steady pulse of a heart at peace.